The year was 1814, and England, beneath the waning reign of King George III, shimmered with the deceptive calm of civility. Its ballrooms gleamed like sanctuaries of grace, though within them thrived whispers sharper than any blade. Among the grand chandeliers and perfumed courtyards of London, the story of a woman who was not meant to exist began to stir again. Her name, when it dared be spoken, was Princess Arabella of Glenhaven, stepdaughter to the Marquess of Elmsworth and Ward of Silence. Once the jewel of the late king's court, Arabella had been hidden away after her mother's untimely death, condemned not by her sins but by her stepfather's ambition. He desired no rival to his daughter's rise, and so the true princess was exiled to the cold serenity of Elmsworth Manor in Northumberland, a place of mist, stone, and neglect. There she lived as little more than a rumor. The servants were instructed never to address her by title, never to mention her beyond the walls. A frail girl of no consequence, the Marquess would say with an indifferent smile whenever polite society inquired. And society, fickle as ever, moved on to newer scandals. Arabella, at 27, bore the quiet dignity of someone long forgotten. She had grown beautiful in solitude, her features refined, her eyes steady yet wistful, her voice soft as if trained by years of speaking only to herself. Her days were filled with dutiful silence, her nights with the faint echo of distant laughter from the manor below, where her stepfather's daughter, Lady Clara, entertained guests and basked in the favor that was once hers. Yet despite her isolation, Arabella did not allow bitterness to corrode her. She read, she painted, and sometimes, when the wind carried the scent of heather through the windows, she would close her eyes and imagine the freedom of walking unseen beneath the endless northern sky. Fate, however, seldom allows beauty to remain buried. Far from the estate, whispers began to circulate in London drawing-rooms of a man whose name provoked both admiration and unease: Alexander Ravenshade, the Duke of Wexford. At 35, he was the paragon of noble formality, rich, learned, and ruthlessly efficient in both business and war. Widowed young, he had built walls of iron around himself, devoting his years to estate affairs and parliamentary duty. Society adored his fortune and feared his candor. They called him the most desired man in England, yet few could claim to know him beyond the veneer of discipline. Behind his composed demeanor lingered loss, a wife taken by fever, a brother lost to the sea, and the unrelenting solitude of a man whom the world loved but no longer touched. It was to Elmsworth Manor that Alexander now travelled, under the guise of a hunting visit, though the truth was more strategic. The Marquess, ever ambitious, sought to bind himself to the Duke through marriage, offering Lady Clara, golden-haired and impeccably mannered, as his prize. Invitations were dispatched, flattery extended, and soon the Duke's sleek black carriage rolled across the northern moors. Arabella watched from her window as it arrived, her breath misting against the glass. To her, it was merely another guest of her stepfather's endless schemes, another man who would drink wine by the fire while she dined alone upstairs. Yet as dusk descended, thunder gathering beyond the hills, something restless stirred within her. Perhaps it was the sound of horses in the distance or the knowledge that life beyond these walls continued with feverish intensity. Perhaps it was the simple, ungovernable desire to be seen. That evening, as the storm thickened, Elmsworth's guests gathered in the drawing-room, laughter competing with the rain. The Duke, tall and austere in his dark coat, seemed immune to their flattery. He spoke little, observed much. His gaze, calm and analytical, wandered briefly toward the upper landing, where, unseen, Arabella watched from behind the half-drawn curtain. For a moment their eyes met through candlelight and shadow. He could not know who she was, and she dared not imagine what he thought, yet something unspoken trembled between them, a flicker of recognition in lives accustomed to silence. The storm worsened as the night deepened. When the Duke prepared to depart for his hunting lodge across the moor, the Marquess insisted on escorting him part way with his retinue. It was then that Arabella, weary of confinement, begged permission to accompany the traveling caravan to the nearby chapel, a rare errand of mercy she used as pretext for a breath of freedom. Her stepfather, distracted by his guest, waved her off with disinterest. What began as a brief journey turned to peril. Rain lashed the countryside with merciless force. The carriages jolted through muddy terrain, and in the chaos, Arabella's coach veered from the path. The horses panicked, the wheels splintered, and in a moment of violence and noise, she was thrown into the cold, unforgiving dark of the forest. Her attendants scattered. When silence returned, only the rain remained. She tried to find her bearings, clutching her soaked shawl, but the forest was vast and merciless. Her shoes sank into mud. Branches clawed at her gown until its silk tore like paper. Her heart pounded with the growing terror of being truly alone for the first time. Then, faintly through the storm, came the echo of hooves. Out of the mist emerged a figure, mounted, cloaked, his black horse glistening with rain. The Duke of Wexford reined to a halt, his lantern cutting through the downpour. For a breathless instant, she thought him an apparition. He dismounted swiftly, his coat sweeping the mud, and bent toward her. "Madam, are you injured?" His voice carried both command and concern. Arabella could barely answer. Her lips were pale, her hair heavy with rain. I lost the road," she stammered. "Then you've found a safer one now," he said, his tone softening. Without hesitation, he lifted her, gently, almost reverently, and placed her upon his horse. She wanted to protest, to explain who she was, but fear and exhaustion silenced her. As they rode through the tempest, the world around them blurred into darkness and thunder. The Duke spoke little, sensing her trembling. When they reached the stone refuge of his hunting lodge, he ordered a fire built, dry clothes fetched, and a chamber prepared. Servants moved quickly, though their glances betrayed curiosity. The Duke ignored them all. She sat by the fire, her gown drying in the heat, her eyes following the flame. He stood beside her, studying her face, the quiet grace, the noble bearing that no disguise could conceal. "You are no common traveler," he said finally, not as accusation but as quiet wonder. Arabella lowered her gaze. "Does it matter, my lord?" He paused, then answered, "It might. In this world, everything does." Outside, the storm raged on, sealing them from the world that had abandoned them both. Within those walls, unspoken truths began to stir, fragile, dangerous, and fated. For neither yet knew that this chance encounter on the wild northern moor would alter the course of their lives, and of England's whispered tales, for generations to come. Dawn broke over the moors with a ghostly light, revealing the silvered heather and the solitary stone lodge of Wexford Hall nestled between the hills. Within, the fire still burned from the night before, and the Duke of Wexford, usually awake before the servants, lingered longer than custom permitted. He found himself uncharacteristically reluctant to leave the quiet chamber where the unknown lady slept. She had given no name, no family, no history, only gratitude and a soft plea to remain unseen. Alexander told himself it was compassion that stayed his curiosity, not the strange pull that had taken hold of him when her eyes, weary yet luminous, met his. When she awoke, pale and composed despite the storm's ordeal, he noted how naturally she seemed to belong even amid grandeur. Her bearing was unstudied, her speech graceful yet modest. She thanked him in the manner of one accustomed to courtesy but not to kindness. The Duke, against all reason, offered her hospitality for the day until a carriage could be arranged to escort her to the nearest village. She hesitated, then accepted with a faint nod, clutching the edges of the cloak he had draped around her shoulders the night before, black wool embroidered with the ravenshade crest, the symbol of Wexford lineage. It was a simple gesture, yet the Duke's household stirred with quiet unease. Servants murmured as they prepared breakfast, their curiosity veiled by rigid decorum. They were loyal, but loyalty never silenced gossip. "She wears his cloak," one whispered, as if she were mistress of the hall. The notion, once spoken, took root like ivy upon stone. By the time the Duke appeared in the dining chamber, word of the mysterious guest had already begun its quiet passage through the corridors. Arabella felt their stares and withdrew inwardly, her every movement measured to avoid suspicion. She told the Duke she was a governess traveling north, her employers lost in the storm. He accepted the lie without question, though his expression betrayed a flicker of disbelief. A governess did not play the pianoforte as she did later that afternoon, her fingers gliding over the keys with elegance and sorrow. Nor did one recite poetry in a voice that trembled with lineage. Yet he said nothing. Perhaps he feared the truth, for truth often demanded action. They spoke little of the world beyond the storm, and yet every conversation drew them closer to the edge of danger. He asked where she had learned music. She answered, from someone who believed beauty was the last refuge of the forgotten. When she inquired why he lived so far from London, he replied, because London remembers too much. Beneath such exchanges lay a current of tenderness neither could name. By evening, the storm had passed, leaving the world washed and silent. The Duke offered her a ride to Elmsworth Manor, unaware it was the very home she dreaded to return to. She refused gently, saying the road was too treacherous still. He accepted her reluctance, though he sensed a deeper reason. To reassure her, he left the cloak in her care, insisting she keep it until her departure. A token of safety, he said simply. She bowed her head, fingers trembling around the heavy fabric. It was the first time in years anyone had given her something without condition. But outside Wexford Hall, nothing remained private for long. 2 days later, the Duke rode to the nearby market town, where the merchants bowed too deeply and the ladies whispered too freely. They had already heard. A lady rescued by his grace, living under his roof. A governess, they say, or worse. The Duke ignored the gossip outwardly, but it followed him like a shadow. By nightfall, even the Marquess of Elmsworth received word through his network of courtiers. His fury was instant and calculating. If the Duke had indeed taken in an unknown woman, it could jeopardize the carefully laid plans to marry his daughter into the Ravenshade fortune. And if that woman was Arabella, hidden no longer, his entire deception risked collapse. He dispatched a letter, forged in politeness yet steeped in venom, inviting the Duke to dine at Elmsworth Manor. The Duke, bound by civility, accepted. Arabella, upon hearing of it from a servant, felt a chill greater than any storm. She knew her stepfather's mind. Every courtesy concealed cruelty. She begged the Duke not to mention her stay at the lodge, saying it would endanger him. He agreed, though he did not understand why fear trembled behind her composure. At the manor, Lady Clara greeted him with practiced warmth. She was beautiful, all golden ringlets and rehearsed laughter, but her charm felt hollow beside the quiet sincerity he had come to know. Throughout the evening, the Marquess steered every topic toward alliance, insinuating the Duke's need for companionship, the purity of Clara's affection, the compatibility of their estates. The Duke listened, polite but distant. When he returned to Wexford Hall, he found himself thinking not of Lady Clara's perfect smile but of a woman playing the pianoforte in firelight, her hands trembling when she thought herself unseen. The following morning, scandal took form. A merchant's wife, having glimpsed Arabella in the Duke's carriage during the storm's aftermath, had told her circle. They, in turn, told theirs, until London itself hummed with speculation. The Duke has taken a mistress, the papers implied. A woman of no rank. Even in the halls of Parliament, whispers followed him. The Duke's reputation, once unblemished, began to tarnish under society's delight in defamation. He returned home early that evening, his composure outwardly intact but his mind alight with turmoil. Arabella stood in the hallway, unaware of the spreading ruin. When she saw his expression, her heart faltered. "They know, do they not?" she whispered. "They think they know," he answered, voice low. "And they will not forgive what they do not understand." She turned from him, shame flooding her cheeks. "I never wished to bring you harm." He stepped closer, the distance between them charged with words unsaid. "You have brought me nothing but truth," he said quietly. "And it has been too long since truth dared my company." Their silence lingered like the calm before another storm. Yet the world outside would not grant them peace. The Marquess arrived that same night, his carriage slicing through the rain-slicked courtyard. He entered unannounced, fury cloaked in civility. "You've entertained a ghost, my lord," he hissed in private. "A royal burden best left buried. That woman is not yours to save." The Duke's eyes hardened. "Nor yours to command," he replied. But the damage was done. Within days, invitations once plentiful grew scarce. The Duke's name, once synonymous with integrity, became a caution whispered behind gloved hands. At Elmsworth, Clara wept with performative sorrow while her father plotted anew. And Arabella, watching from her solitary window, realized the price of one man's kindness could be the ruin of them both. Yet even ruin has its strange grace. On the final evening before the Duke's return to London, he found her again in the music-room. She rose as he entered, startled, the cloak still about her shoulders. He approached, his voice barely above a breath. "They would make this a scandal," he said. "Let them. You have suffered invisibility too long." Her answer was simple, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "If I am seen, my lord, I fear it will destroy us both." He reached for the cloak's clasp, fastening it gently. "Then let them see," he murmured, "and let them be damned." Outside, thunder rolled once more across the moors, a sound like destiny awakening. And though the storm would soon pass, its echo would carry through every corridor of Wexford Hall, where whispers had begun to turn into legend. Night fell over Wexford Hall with an uneasy stillness, as though the very walls held their breath. The day's turmoil had left the servants mute with apprehension and the Duke restless beneath the weight of rumor. Candles flickered in long corridors, their flames bending in the draughts that crept through stone. Outside, the moors lay cloaked in fog, silent but for the distant cry of an owl. Within that quiet vastness, a secret waited to surface, one that neither courage nor propriety could suppress much longer. Arabella had resolved to leave before dawn. She had packed what little she possessed, and folded the Duke's cloak carefully atop her trunk. The fabric carried his scent, cedar, rain, and something unnamably solemn. She told herself it was mercy to go, that by vanishing she might spare him the ruin her presence had invited. Yet her hands trembled as she touched the door, for some part of her heart begged to be stopped. She had been unseen all her life. Now, for the first time, someone had truly looked at her. Footsteps echoed faintly down the hall, measured, deliberate. The Duke had not retired. When the latch turned, Arabella froze. He entered, his expression unreadable, his voice low enough that only the walls bore witness. "You mean to leave," he said. It was not a question. "I must," she replied, unable to meet his gaze. "Every hour I remain here, your name suffers for it." He moved closer, the faint moonlight revealing the strain in his face. "Do you think I value reputation above decency?" "Above you?" Her composure faltered. "You do not know who I am." "Then tell me," he said, his tone firm but not unkind. "Let me judge truth for myself." The words hung between them, heavy as confession. For weeks she had carried the burden of silence, her lineage, her captivity, the years of exile forced by her stepfather's greed. To speak it aloud felt like betrayal of her mother's memory, yet to remain silent would destroy the man who had risked his honor for her. "I was not born to obscurity," she began, voice scarcely more than a whisper. "My mother was the late Queen's lady-in-waiting. When the king favored her with affection, the court turned cruel. I was the consequence of scandal and pity, a child the crown could not claim, yet could not cast away entirely. My mother married the Marquess of Elmsworth for protection, but when she died, he saw in me only a threat to his own ambition. He hid me from the world, said it was for propriety, but it was power he sought, to marry his daughter to a duke and keep me forgotten." The Duke listened in silence, every word striking him like truth long denied. Her bearing, her diction, the quiet sorrow that clung to her, all the mysteries now made sense. Still, what moved him most was not her title but her endurance. So the whispers were true, he murmured, half to himself. The hidden princess of Glenhaven. I am no princess, she said bitterly. Only a shadow of one. They erased me before I learned what it meant to belong. He stepped nearer, his voice gentling. Then allow me to say what others would not, that you are seen, Arabella. Not as rumor, nor as shame, but as you are. She lifted her gaze to his then, and for a moment neither spoke. The distance between them, rank, duty, fear, seemed to dissolve in that fragile stillness. Outside, the clouds shifted, letting a shaft of moonlight spill through the tall window and across the chamber floor. It touched her face like benediction. I should not have come to you, she said softly. You have given me kindness the world denied. But now you must forget I ever existed. He shook his head slowly. You ask what I cannot grant. Since the night I found you, every hour has been marked by your absence or your presence. There is no forgetting such a thing. Her breath caught. If you speak so, they will destroy you. Then let them, he replied with quiet finality. I have lived for duty long enough. For once, I would live for what is right. His words trembled with a conviction she could not bear. She turned away, afraid of hope, afraid of him. But he followed her gaze to the window where the moon traced silver patterns on the glass. Arabella, he said, her name a vow in itself. You have hidden from cruelty for too long. Let me be the one who shields you from it now. She looked at him then, eyes shining with tears. You do not understand. My stepfather would not let me vanish without consequence. He will say I deceived you. He will claim I am mad. The Duke's jaw tightened. Then I shall answer him myself. She shook her head. He holds influence in court. He can ruin your name before you speak a word. And if silence is the price of peace, it is one I no longer wish to pay. He paused, then lowered his voice to something softer, almost reverent. You said once that beauty was the last refuge of the forgotten. I have forgotten beauty, Arabella, until you. Her resolve fractured then. The tears she had denied fell freely, shimmering in the pale light. He reached for her hand, not in possession but in understanding, and when his fingers brushed hers, the world seemed to still. He lifted her hand gently, pressing his lips to her knuckles in a gesture both tender and eternal. In that moment, rank ceased to matter. There was no duke, no lost princess, no world watching. Only two souls who had lived too long behind walls of restraint, finding in each other the quiet proof that love could still bloom in secret places. Yet even as their hearts dared to speak, the weight of consequence returned. A rap echoed on the door below, faint but urgent, the sound of a messenger arriving through the night. The Duke turned sharply, instinct warning what the heart refused to hear. Arabella's voice trembled. It will be him. My stepfather's hand in ink, his vengeance in words. He looked toward the stairway, then back to her. Whatever it brings, you will not face it alone. The candle sputtered in the draught, shadows shifting across the room like restless spirits. Neither moved, caught between confession and destiny. Beyond the window, the first trace of dawn ghosted the horizon, pale and cold. And in that narrow hour between night and morning, between secrecy and revelation, the Duke of Wexford and the hidden daughter of a fallen court stood upon the edge of ruin and redemption, knowing that by sunrise, their hearts would have no refuge but truth itself. The morning broke like a trembling confession over the moors, soft light bleeding through pale mist, the air heavy with promise and farewell. In the vast grounds of Wexford Hall, the Duke stood by the ancient oaks, his cloak unfastened, his eyes hollowed by the sleepless night. Word had already reached London. The missing Princess of Glenhaven had been found. Yet what the world did not know was that she had been here, beneath his very roof, her laughter echoing through his corridors like sunlight in shadowed halls. And now she was gone. Arabella had been summoned to London by royal decree. The truth of her lineage, concealed for years by deceit, had unraveled like a silken thread. The Marquess of Elmsworth, her stepfather, had been exposed before the crown, stripped of his influence and dignity. Yet for all the justice meted out, Arabella's heart had not found peace. As her carriage rolled toward the capital that morning, she felt the ache of parting deepen with each mile, as though the wilds themselves mourned the distance between them. At Wexford Hall, Alexander's world seemed hollow. The estate's halls, once alive with the quiet pulse of her presence, now echoed only with absence. He walked the west wing, where she had embroidered by the fire, where her laughter had stilled his tormented spirit. His hand brushed against the carved banister she once leaned upon, and his throat tightened. Every trace of her was a haunting, every silence a wound. It was Lady Agatha who delivered the letter. The Duchess Dowager's trembling hand offered the sealed parchment to her son, her eyes glistening with something between pride and sorrow. "She left this," she said softly. The seal was broken, and Arabella's words spilled like breath, delicate, restrained, and aching. "My lord, you once told me the forest reveals what civility conceals. It is where hearts are stripped of titles, and only truth remains. I found mine there, amongst the rain, the thunder, and your eyes that saw me not as a princess, but as a woman. Yet duty demands I return to the world that would cage me once more. Forgive me if I cannot bid farewell in person, for if I looked upon you again, I fear my courage would fail me entirely." Alexander's hand shook as he folded the page. The words did not end. They lingered, living within him, demanding an answer no ink could hold. And so, when twilight fell again over the Northumberland hills, the Duke of Wexford mounted his black stallion and rode, not toward London, but toward the same wilds where it all began. The forest greeted him with the scent of rain-soaked earth and the whisper of old memories. Every step of the horse echoed the rhythm of her name. It was there, beneath the shivering birch trees, that he had first seen her, the lost stranger, the woman whose eyes mirrored both defiance and despair. He dismounted, standing in the hush of that remembered moment, and breathed her name into the wind. Arabella! But fate, ever merciful to the hearts that dare, was already weaving a reunion. The next morning, London awoke to news of the Duke's sudden arrival at the palace. The court gathered like a murmuring storm as the grand doors of the ballroom opened. Arabella, resplendent in a gown of pale gold, stood before the king's advisers, her posture serene, though her eyes betrayed the storm within. The hall fell silent as Alexander entered, his presence commanding yet unguarded, his gaze fixed upon her alone. Gasps followed, whispers trailing like shadows. The most desired duke in England, unmarried, unyielding, untamed, now walked with purpose toward the woman society had once declared vanished. He paused only once, to bow before the crown, then spoke, his voice resonant enough to still every breath. "Your Majesty, I come not to plead favor, but to make plain my truth. The woman before you is not only your kin, nor merely the jewel of this court. She is the keeper of my honor and the compass of my soul. I would have the world know that the Duke of Wexford kneels for no throne, but he kneels for her." The room erupted in murmurs, but the Duke knelt all the same, his eyes never leaving Arabella's. For a moment, time itself hesitated, the chandeliers flickered, the air hung suspended, and then, softly, she stepped forward. Her hands, trembling yet resolute, found his. "Rise, my lord," she whispered, her voice breaking through the hush like a benediction. "For you have already lifted me from every darkness I have known." The king's approval came not through proclamation, but through silence, a silence that signified acceptance. What followed was a cascade of applause, the kind that carried both scandal and salvation in equal measure. Weeks later, the wilds of Wexford once again became their refuge. Spring returned to the moors, and with it came the rebirth of all that winter had buried. Arabella, now Duchess of Wexford, walked through the same forest where destiny had first intervened. Her gown, pale as dawn, brushed the grass heavy with dew. Behind her, Alexander followed, no longer the ruthless Duke of Rumor, but a man reborn through love's quiet grace. They stopped beneath the old birch where the storm had once raged. The Duke took her hand and pressed it to his lips, his eyes soft with something unspoken. "This place," he murmured, "has seen us both lost and found." She smiled faintly. "It was never the wilds that changed our hearts, Alexander. It was the courage to be found in them." He drew her close then, the world hushed around them, the moor, the wind, the soft sigh of spring. And as their foreheads touched, the promise of every unspoken vow lingered between them. Far beyond Wexford, gossip would soon fade, titles would lose their luster, and the whispers of court would be swallowed by time. But here, where the earth remembered their first meeting and the sky held their final vow, two souls, once divided by power and pride, stood unashamed before eternity. And so it was that the wilds of Northumberland, once cruel and untamed, became the very sanctuary of love. Where storms had once threatened to tear them apart, the quiet after the rain bound them forever, two hearts at last unburdened, beating in a world of their own making. For even in an age ruled by crowns and consequence, the truest kingdoms were the ones built not of stone or decree, but of love, found and fought for, beneath the endless English sky.